Welcome to Nonsense Season 3, Episode 18, our big story. I'm Jeff Parker.
I'm Skittle.
This time we're looking at the sinking of the supply chain, the Great Wall of Tariffs. Up next.
I'm excited.
A programming note, we are off next week. If there are shortages, CJ, what would you miss the most?
Like product shortages?
Yeah, I would imagine.
Probably my happiness and my freedom. Those are the two that I'm going to miss the most.
Are those products, are those things that can be bought?
Well, just not having things around, not being surrounded by random IoT devices brings me no joy. That's my biggest concern.
I pre-bought mine, so I'm good for a while.
I also feel like I'm just not going to get to see my UPS driver as often. That's the other thing that makes me kind of sad.
My AliExpress driver and I we're forging quite a relationship.
It's over now. You just had a breakup.
Well, no, there's still things on the way that haven't quite made it here yet, but then it's going to be all over.
You and your AliExpress driver, it's like when you went to Europe for the summer after college and you had that like a 2-month fling, like you're never seeing that person again. They are long gone. Maybe you'll write a letter once.
Miss you, Gino.
I'm trying to find optimism in all of this.
Sure.
It does seem like we might end up in this world where there's a glut of some products for a while.
You're going to have about 2 months of glut when farmers who need to normally export their goods can't export their goods because there's reciprocal tariffs on them.
Yeah.
So they will not be able to export them. So they will go into our grocery stores and drive down the prices of blah, 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 soybeans.
Before they then skyrocket back up. So there's a chance we export something like 4 billion pounds of beef out of this country across the year. I'm hoping to buy all of it. Everything that we don't export, I want to just go eat. So I'm just hoping that I can, maybe I can get me some cheap rib cap or something like that. That's my plan.
Beef is what you take out of all of this?
People can't get their prescriptions. You know what? We're going to be fine. I have rib cap. That's all that matters.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Let's get into this. Let's go. The New York Times had a great article about all the Chinese goods that are in your house. Did you see this?
Oh, yeah. They broke down like what percentage of stuff came from China.
Right. Toasters, 99%. Alarm clocks, 90%. By the way, who buys an alarm clock? Doesn't that, maybe they're referring to the ones that are in your phone. Because does anybody still have an alarm clock that's not their phone?
I think that's software, Jeffrey.
I know, right? Umbrellas, 98% from China. Bamboo shelves, 97% from China. Baby strollers, 97% from China. Thermoses, 96%. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Fireworks, 96%.
What is the 4% of the stroller components that don't come from China?
The fireworks.
That's what I want to know.
96% of fireworks come from China. Where do the other 4% come from? I'm really curious what that
Great question.
What that is.
Ohio. Probably Ohio, if I had to guess.
Bathroom scales. By the way, China can keep those. 96% of those come from China.
Yes, they should.
Related to bathroom scales, charcoal grills, 96% come from China.
Now I feel seen. Is this an intervention? Is my family here? Where is everybody else?
If you buy a pizza oven, the odds are
when you buy a pizza oven, go ahead.
From China. Well, no, because if the prices go up, the tariffs go up, you know what you do instead of buying a pizza oven? You just order a pizza. I mean, you have other options. There are other things you can do in many cases.
You and other regular people may. I don't have an option.
The person who sells the pizza oven, the person who moves those around in a warehouse, the person who brings those to you on a carrier ship, those people are all out of work.
Yeah.
Because you didn't buy the pizza oven, instead you went to Domino's. So the effects of this are huge.
Oh, I'm still thinking about it. Little tariff's not going to stop me. Are you kidding me?
Microwave ovens, 90% of them come from China.
Yes.
Blenders, 83% of them come from China. I mean, this list in the New York Times was quite surprising.
You need to send this to Drew Carey, because this should be a show on The Price is Right. This should be like a little segment where they just have like rain boots and you got to go 49% and then you get it right. Like that should be what it is.
Adidas just announced they're going to have to raise prices because of the tariffs. We're likely to see grocery items like seafood, coffee, alcohol, beef, rice, cheese, nuts, chocolate, olive oil.
Yes.
All those prices are going up because we bring in those things from other parts of the world.
Did you see what orders are down on soybeans? Man, this feels like an episode of Trading Places. Listen to us, the Beaks Report. The soybeans is down because I saw the number and I'm like, oh, the Chinese orders for soybeans this week is like
1,800 tons, something like that.
I was like, that's a lot of fucking soybeans. Yeah. Then you realize it's down 97% from last week.
From what we normally ship to China.
Wait a minute. How many soybeans do we normally ship? And as it turns out, it's like over 70,000 tons of soybeans we would ship. So if you're a soybean farmer right now,
you're in trouble.
We are not making your farm great again. We are definitely making your farm barren, I think is what we're doing.
Unless you are independently wealthy, you're probably very quickly not going to be a soybean farmer. In fact, you may not even be a farmer anymore. Yeah. Think about UPS. They're going to cut, literally, this is announced, they're going to cut 20,000 jobs and close 70 facilities just because of the reduction they're going to have in Amazon shipments.
In delivery, like we are seeing shipping. So Jeff and I both live in Los Angeles. Most people know this. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach do the vast majority of all Chinese goods come from China, land in those ports, and then are distributed throughout the U.S.
Yeah.
Those bookings are down 30% this week. And like another 30% next week.
Next week, they're projected to be down 35%.
So more than half of the things that normally came in are not going to be in next week. And you can't just turn that back on. Those boats, they're just giant buildings in the water. So they take 30 days to get here from China.
Yeah.
So that's already been way slowed down since April 10th. And you're going to see it likely in LA first. So we get to LA in about 30 days from China. You get to like Houston in about 45 days. You get to Chicago in about 45 days. You got to do some of it by train. As those goods dry up, those deliveries dry up, if you've got a dock working job, if you're unloading containers, if you're loading trucks, if you're unloading trucks at warehouses, you're going to see a whole bunch of jobs that are going to be paused, furloughed, or laid off in short order, like in the next couple of weeks.
There was a rumor that Amazon was going to break out their tariff costs. Do you remember we talked about it during the news segment? We talked about AliExpress.
We did.
Breaks out.
Yeah.
If you go in now and you fill your cart full of stuff and you go to check out and they break out, well, this is what the import costs are.
Yeah.
And it's literally the tariff amount that would have to be paid on those items.
Yeah.
And it costs more than the actual items in your cart.
Yeah.
The rumor was that Amazon was going to break out the tariff costs. It turned out to be untrue because Amazon can't piss off Trump or they'll be in real trouble. I want to talk about what's happening in the supply chain in just 3 little quick categories.
But before you do that, luggage, 37%.
That's all? 30% of luggage comes from
37% of your luggage parts come from China, apparently.
Where does the rest of it come from? Italy? Where's the rest of the luggage come from?
I'm not the narrator. I'm just reading the New York Times table.
Okay.
What do you want from me?
Here's what I want to do. I want to talk about what's up with the supply chain.
Okay.
I want to talk about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930.
Yeah.
Because we've done this before. We did this in 1930.
We did.
And this is going to probably give us the best forecasting of what's going to happen to us.
Yeah.
And then where does this all lead? Because it's not the 30s anymore. Things are very, very different. So if we could just...
It's almost the 30s. It'll be the 30s in 5 years. I mean, shit, maybe faster with these tariffs.
Sure. But not the 1930s. Oh. And then talk about where this is all leading and where we think it will go.
Yeah, down. It'll go down.
I'm not particularly optimistic about the short term, and that's if we were to get rid of everything.
I do think it's worth noting that it's worth thinking about the supply chain in 2 parts. Like there's the production stage, which I think is commonly what we're thinking about when we talk about these tariffs. So that's like the components and the semi-finished parts that get stuck together in a manufacturing process to build a thing, right? So it's like normally would call that an assembly plant. You then have distribution. So you then have shipping it from where it was manufactured to typically some central or regional distribution, and then all the way out to end consumers. So you've got your wholesalers, you've got your retailers, ends up at your house.
You chose an interesting phrase there that I want to just look at really quickly.
Yeah.
Sales tax. I'm only taxed on things that go to the end user. When I as a business buy things, so long as those things are passed on to an end user, if I'm selling those things to an end user, I'm not taxed on them. Sales tax.
Yeah, and
that's not true of tariffs.
Yes, that is correct. Also worth pointing out, just to be completely clear on the sales tax, it's while you pay it as the consumer, technically you're not the one that has to remit it. It's remitted by the retailer, but you still pay it. It's passed on to you, right? And you pay it.
Yeah.
Your point is with tariffs that the same rules don't apply. On that good during the manufacturing process, the manufacturer could be paying a tariff on those components every time they cross the border.
Yeah.
Even more complicated when you're building things like cars, but when you've got the pieces going back and forth because you're doing manufacturing and assembly in different spots, those things are being tariffed every time they cross those borders.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that we call these things supply chains, but they are far from linear. The best term I've seen to describe this is just called the extended enterprise, because there's no part of this that's linear like a chain.
Right.
You can't really think about it as a supply chain.
It's a supply web.
Yeah. Yes. And what we're basically talking about is a loosely coupled, self-organizing network of businesses who cooperate in providing product and service offerings. That's really what we're talking about.
Okay.
Just about everything that is made now involves multiple parties. There's virtually nothing that you can buy that is single party.
Yeah.
Everything is going to come from different producers and vendors. So that's what we're talking about.
90% of the microwaves you buy are from China.
Yeah.
But think of a car. Think of cars. We buy 0 cars from China. Literally 0 cars from China because there's already tariffs and things on them. However, when I go and buy a car tomorrow, a lot of that car is full of parts that came from China. So a certain percentage of that car already is coming from China.
Sure. You're talking about specifically like the chips, right?
All sorts of things in that car are made from China.
What happened? Where are we today? Basically, we had tariffs that were announced back in April that were pretty aggressive, specifically the ones on China. And now you have these reactions that aren't political in nature. They're just responding responding to the sort of the business climate of how you try to operate, and with what I would call extreme uncertainty, because we don't know what the positioning is on this. Are these tariffs intended to be in place for a long period of time, and that's how I should be operating my business? Are you planning for long tail, or is this short term, a negotiation tactic, and ultimately we think they're going to be reverted in end months? I don't think anybody knows. Certainly, I don't know.
When you say long term or short term, the damage is already done. I mean,
significant damage is done for sure. The rough breakdown on timing on this is you're like, well, okay, wait, why now? Why are we seeing this so much later? And this is where I think we really lack what I would call having an adult in the room, like someone that can actually pass the marshmallow test, because the effects that you have don't happen on April 10th. You already had boats on the water coming over to the States. It takes them roughly a month to get here.
Yeah, 30 days.
So those ships had already sailed, and now that's stopped. So you don't have bookings. You have people that have paused POs and no longer have order commitments from manufacturing in China. So the shit's not being made.
Actually, both ways.
Yeah,
China's
both ways,
canceled contracts for manufacturers from the U.S.
Yep. So now you've got stuff that's not being made and then isn't going to be shipped. So you look at like things like container shipping costs. Currently, it's way down because now you've got a ton of expected demand that has now vaporized.
It's momentarily down. All those ships and containers will be repositioned to other parts of the world, to Vietnam or wherever else things are made.
Yeah. Or docked, right? I mean, like they'll be pulled out of service to not be put back in for a while. Like you can see the whole mechanism is just slowing down. Yeah. So you're talking about 1 to 2 months of when you're going to see these things slow down. And that's already happening. So if you look at the effects of what went in place on April 10th, you're talking about roughly May 10th, you're going to see stuff shut down. And that's going to be almost certainly you're going to see reduction in truckers, right? Like the truck work once you unload this stuff from the port, it gets stuck on a truck to then get distributed to the warehouse, the distribution warehouse, or the retailers or whatnot. A lot of that's going to vaporize.
Although I thought this was kind of fascinating. Walmart and Target have resumed business with some Chinese factories after their tariff-related halts. They got some sort of waiver we don't know about. Something happened.
Well, we don't know. We don't know they got a waiver. We also don't know if they just got a fucking signal tweet at 2 a.m. that just said, hey, I think manufacturing looks really good right now. And they just decided to spin it back up because you're not paying the tariff until it lands. You can make the thing in China. You can put it in a boat. You're not paying the tariff until it lands on U.S. soil. So you are playing a little bit of roulette. And right now, folks believe these tariffs, they believe, they don't know what state they're going to be in. Yeah. So they're just not taking the risk. That's why they're not putting more things on boats. What is interesting about this, if you think about like the hypothetical, and I got this from this guy, Molson Hart. He's the founder and CEO of Viahart. They're consumer products. They make a bunch of kids' toys. They make some really interesting stuff. And he had posted and said that let's just say hypothetically that this hits on May 10th, and a couple of weeks later, the U.S. Trump says, "Oh, this was a mistake. I want to completely reverse course." He says that China says, "Oh, no problem. We understand. We're going to go ahead and drop all our tariffs too, and all the manufacturers that we fucked along the way by canceling orders." They also say, "Yeah, sure, we'll come along for the ride. We'll start making stuff. We'll go right back to our old levels." So a full reversion to pre-tariff time. I'd say that it's extremely unlikely at any point because it's going to take some time to ramp up, but let's just say hypothetically it was. You're still talking now about at least 30 to 60 days until you see a return of that volume, at least. Mm-hmm. I mean, in reality, it's going to be a lot longer.
Well, you see worse. That 30 days is just the shipping time.
Just the shipping time.
The time for the people to go work in the factories and create the goods that they want to ship.
Make the stuff back. And then are you going to be ordering back at 100%? Pretty unlikely. So my point is we're going to have, I think, at least, the math on this is pretty simple, at least 30 days, probably more like at least 45 to 60 days on the West Coast where you're just not going to have product coming in at all. Yeah. And once you burn through the inventory, you're going to see empty shelves. And it's not like you've got warehouses sitting full of this stuff. Like we haven't completely stocked up.
Some people did. Apple did. Yep. I mean, there's a handful. I did, certainly. I did a lot.
Me and you were fine. Yeah.
These are real problems for real people who are really going to lose their jobs. And it's going to be a massive domino effect.
I can't see a way around that. That's going to happen at least short term, if not longer. And our general experience, we saw this in the past when you've seen downturns like this, certainly during COVID, certainly before that with the financial crisis of 08, 09, they don't come back quickly, if they come back at all. And that's the production level of anything, whether it's shipping, manufacturing. It takes a while.
An example, soybean farmers in the U.S.
Yep.
Other places in the world can grow soybeans.
Totally.
So all sorts of places that never grew soybeans before, now they go, oh, there's a market in China.
You can get a mature soybean in a couple of months. Yeah.
I can send them soybeans. And right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's great for China because they go, wow, we get soybeans and we don't have to pay a tariff from country blah, blah, blah. And they build relationships. And so even if you were to reverse all of this stuff, now these Chinese buyers have a relationship with Madagascar and I have no idea, soybeans.
Vanilla. They grow vanilla.
And that's not going to go away.
Yeah, of course. You get that inertia. Once you have that relationship.
Yes.
I mean, that's the real damage that we're doing here. Yeah, no, it's pretty grim. Once we started looking at this, and this is why we wanted to do a show on it this week, there is not a world where this isn't going to happen. This has already happened. You already have boats that are not coming here.
Yeah.
That we normally would have expected. You already have goods that are stalled.
And boats not going there.
And boats not coming back. I've already read from folks that are in the supply chain management business where carriers are no longer taking return containers.
Oh, really?
Because they know that they're going to get stuck with them. Yeah, they're already stopping on return containers. Now, that could change, but we saw this with COVID where once you broke that chain, you end up with empty containers in the wrong spots. And that's another bit of friction to warming this thing back up. You can't just FedEx the containers back to China. Right. So typically the boats come here, they unload, they take previous containers back with them, sometimes with stuff, sometimes empty, to drop them off back there and then load up with more shit. And the cycle continues. Having bought several 20-foot containers, some are absolutely beat to shit. Like they run these things into the ground.
They get used.
Because they go back and forth, right? That's now getting paused. That's going to be more friction to spinning this thing back up. You also have people that are canceling POs because they don't know, right? They're like, I can't buy this thing. Once they cancel a PO for manufacturing, same thing happens to the manufacturer side. Now they've got to slow down on their labor. They've got to slow down on their purchasing. They don't have the room to make the goods and sit on them until we get our shit together to then repurchase them.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing just stops. I really do think it's going to feel a lot like March of 2020 when COVID hit and things just hit the brakes for the US. Where again, you're still making shit for other countries.
Yeah.
But for the US, a lot of this stuff is just going to stop. And even with the hope of moving manufacturing, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes quite some time.
We talked earlier about iPhone moving manufacturing to India. And they won't be able to be up and running fully until like the end of 2026. That's quite a gap.
You and I are talking about it now like it's brand new to us, but folks have seen this coming and have moved manufacturing to places like India, to places like Vietnam. I didn't appreciate that Vietnam's had something like I think 8% GDP growth year over year for the past several years.
Yeah, sure.
They're blowing up in manufacturing.
You're starting from a low base.
Yeah, of course, but still, I appreciate that they've got significant growth. The other thing I didn't appreciate is that they were able to sort of avoid significant infrastructure improvements because something like 80% of the containers that flow out of Vietnam come down a river to get out, which I think is really interesting. Sure. Like they're taking advantage of their sort of natural
geography,
and floating these containers downriver to then get loaded onto a container ship and pulled out. There was somebody that I heard talking about folks that I think for the past decade or so were buying used equipment in China, used manufacturing equipment in China, throwing in containers and moving it to Vietnam. And something like, I want to say hundreds or thousands of containers a year of equipment going to Vietnam to help kickstart their manufacturing industry.
It's also because cost of labor in Vietnam is slightly cheaper now than cost of labor in China.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the thing you're chasing here, right? It's like, we did a lot of manufacturing here, certainly over the past 60, 100, 150 years. Forget about the current turmoil that we're in. You automate, I think, most of that, right? Because not every human wants to do this. Of course. And that seemed to be the path that we were heading down. But once you stop wanting those highly skilled jobs and you go, well, I want to go back to a traditional non-automated manufacturing job. And you go, well, okay, that doesn't come with a high wage that's globally competitive. You go, oh, no, I still want the high wage. I still want to be able to have the nice TV and get the Wagyu beef and buy my BMW. You're like, oh yeah, no, those two things don't come together.
We don't offer that job anymore because farming now is automated.
Well,
or whatever the job was that you want back, those things are automated now. We don't do that anymore.
Which might be a little bit of silver lining that we get out of this whole tariff debacle.
Push toward automation.
More push towards automation, right? And this is something that you and I have talked about. I think is worth sharing with our listeners. Is we've seen similar examples of this. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 1930 that a lot of people compare these times to, it was not a great story initially, right? Like it was really bad. It was very, very protectionist.
It was intended to help struggling farmers because sugar beets were getting destroyed here in the U.S. because we were bringing in cheap Cuban sugar growers. If you don't have a minimum wage, you can really make sugar cheaply.
Okay.
So it was destroying the sugar industry in the 1930s. Smoot was looking out for the Utah sugar beet growers.
The sugar beet growers. You didn't fuck with those guys. Big sugar beet, man. Woo.
So the Republican members of Congress thought, well, here's the way we can pick up the farm vote is if we put in these tariffs and we protect the farmers.
Yeah. Before this was enacted, you had people like Henry Ford himself go to the White House to try to explain to President Herbert Hoover that this was a terrible idea and a bad law. And apparently that didn't work.
By the way, this is only import duties on 20,000 goods. That sounds like an enormous amount of goods compared to the Trump administration who said, hold my beer.
Yeah. Totally. Well, to be fair, we do have more goods now. But
we blow that number away now. In your history books, you looked at that and went, oh my gosh, 20,000 goods. What were they thinking? Sure. And now it's like that number is a rounding error compared to how many goods we've put tariffs on.
There's 20,000 SKUs at fucking Walmart alone.
Right.
Of course. So this was enacted in 1930. The year before, in 1929, U.S. exported about $7 billion worth of stuff.
Sure.
3 years later, what do you think that number went up to?
I think it went up from $7 billion. I think it went up to $2.4 billion.
That's exactly what happened. It went straight up to $2.4 billion. It was basically cut to a third. And you saw global trade. So not, where we have no regulation, global trade went down by about 65%. So about 2/3 of global trade between 1929 and 1934 just vanished. Yeah. And this goes back to your point about currency velocity. You just slow everything down.
That's the important thing to remember. It is the pie is not one size. The pie can be enlarged or shrunken based upon currency velocity, how fast the dollar gets from the butcher to the baker, the candlestick maker. We can make a lot of goods if everybody's employed and working hard and we're trading a lot. Yeah. But if we're not doing any of that, the pie can shrink to a very small size. It's not like I get a little 10% wedge of the pie and that's all the pie there is. It's not a finite amount of pie. It's really much more about currency velocity and how big you can make that pie.
It's a function of moving it.
I need everybody to work really hard. And in order to do that, I need people to buy things and I need people to sell things. And the more of that activity I get, the better all of our lives get.
Yeah. So this was a step away from free trade and a step towards protectionism, a big step towards protectionism. And then 4 or 5 years later, it was pretty much entirely repealed in 34 by, I think, was it FDR? I think it was FDR.
Correct.
That was signed in 1934, reduce tariff levels and bring us towards more free, open, cooperative trade policies, which is basically what's, I don't want to say stayed in place, but has been, I think, the underpinnings of what we have today, 70, 80 years later.
It cemented Herbert Hoover as one of the worst presidents ever. I have a question for you.
Yeah, please.
How in the world is Trump able to enact these tariffs? This seems like this is the territory of Congress. And suddenly now the president is able to unilaterally, just by executive order, create tariffs?
Well, yeah, you would hope. I mean, you would hope that you'd have at least a couple of the arms of government working together in lockstep to achieve this. As it turns out, we have this thing called the International Emergency Economics Power Act of 1977, intended to address any sort of national emergency, some sort of threat that we hadn't thought about before, we need to respond to quickly.
Yes, exogenous threats.
Yes, I generally think that is a good thing to have in place. So now you can sort of cut through the time component of some bureaucracy when you've got Congress and the executive branch trying to work together.
If you need to act very, very quickly.
Very, very
but
quickly.
Then Congress ought to be right behind you to sweep up and say, yes, we second that emotion 3 days later.
And to my knowledge, that is not included in this act. There is no necessity for Congress to come back afterwards in a couple of days and say, yeah, we're aligned on this. We can continue this. So what Trump has done is he's invoked his authority under this to address the national emergency posed by, quote, the large and persistent trade deficit that is driven by the absence of reciprocity in our trade relationships and other harmful policies like currency manipulation. I'm not going to say they manufactured it out of whole cloth. It kind of feels like we've taken some of the highlights of some of the things that aren't great and said, well, this is an emergency. We're going to go attack it this way. And here's this plan.
It's an emergency that's been happening for 50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, I don't know why all of a sudden today it's an emergency.
I appreciate you got to address it at some point. And I am someone who would normally lean more towards to quote our Lord and Savior Elon Musk, I would lean more towards the chainsaw approach than not. But I would also stop short of using the chainsaw to cut off my nose because I was grumpy at my face. And I feel like that's more what we've done here. Yeah. And I went back and read the quote fact sheet that the White House put out around this.
When they declared the emergency.
And sort of some of the bullets around it. There were a couple things in there that stood out to me. One in particular is buried at the bottom. They have this kind kind of think of it like the references section in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
You get down to the bottom, you're like, oh, here's all the things that mean this is legitimate. And you can go in, you can click on them, and you can fact check and whatever.
Sure.
To be clear, there are no links on the White House fact sheet, but there are like 5 bullets at the bottom. And one of them had a quote from Janet Yellen, who was the Treasury Secretary under Biden. The quote was, "I don't believe that American consumers will see any meaningful increase in the prices that they face." And I was like, okay, I believe she said that, but there's no context here.
Yeah.
Let me go see what the context is.
She did say it.
She did say it.
Yeah.
It is a 100% legitimate quote that she said. But the context was what she said in that, and it's literally the next sentence of the quote, was that, quote, President Biden announced tariffs on roughly $18 billion of imports from China. They're very carefully targeted at sectors that we're supporting through legislation that President Biden passed with Congress, the clean energy sector, semiconductors, and other sectors where we consider it critical to create good jobs.
Sure.
There is so much more information packed in that fucking sentence than just, oh, your prices aren't going to go up. Like, they did it with Congress. They were very targeted.
Yeah, they're targeted.
It's super small. It was $18 billion of imports, which is a drop in the bucket, as opposed to one, I'm going to say randomly, it really wasn't randomly, but it was not well thought out, putting a blanket margin on everything and everybody. Mm-hmm. And in all this reading that I've done, you find some random folks that say a lot with not a lot of words. And one of my favorites was somebody said, as a German, I recommend you not take on the whole world at once. Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, that seems like a lesson that maybe we should learn at some point.
You're speaking with some authority, sure.
Like, no one's going to be like, oh, no, really, I think you should fight everybody. That worked out so well. So that's how we got where we are, right? Is this emergency power that provides him the authority to declare a national emergency and then say, okay, I'm going to put this into place.
When you used to go into a recession, when you have less productivity, the dollar falls.
Yeah.
The dollar has already fallen 6% since the beginning of this. That's a big fall.
6% in like a couple of weeks. It's not like we're talking about a long period of time here.
But the good news is a lot of people starving and being out of work and complaining, the tariffs will be reversed.
I suspect. That's why I can't see this. Like I said, I take the under on 6 months.
Yeah.
If you drew a better line, I'd tell you to take the over the under, but I really...
Because the damage will be so big.
This show, I don't know if people know this, we're not doing it live, but we're not recording it far in advance, and I don't know if they're going to be reversed by the time this thing airs. That's literally how much uncertainty there is in the next couple of hours between when I'm saying these words and this show gets released. They might be reversed, and I'd be like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. It's just fascinating to try to think through what the potential outcomes of this could be.
If you drag this out, you will lose something like 80% of small businesses that buy from China. You'll have massive bankruptcies.
I don't know if you have to drag it out that much. I think you're talking about like weeks. You may see somewhere between like 40 to 80% of SMBs are gone.
We are making China great again. Oh, this is kind of an interesting thing, by the way.
Yeah.
First of all, because we're sending back people who are getting PhDs and scientists who had funding to study this and that, and we're killing their funding.
How dare you come here?
And China is saying, hey, come to China. So there's a brain drain that's going to China.
Yeah.
But there's also kind of an interesting thing that I wanted to look at, and that is the Chinese are now marketing goods to themselves.
Yeah.
They've got 1.3 billion people.
Yeah.
To replace the U.S. consumer, 300 million of us, that's a fraction of the Chinese population.
Fourth.
So they have started advertising, hey, you needed this and that. You needed this and that. And as they build up their own consumerism within their own country, the U.S. could just become completely irrelevant.
I mean, that is a really interesting thought experiment. So you think about all of this supply that has now at least been paused, in some cases stopped. You still have a workforce that can make it. There's nowhere for it to go. Let me be clear. Nowhere for it to go in the U.S.
Yeah, you just have to find a new outlet for it.
You're still selling it to other countries. It's, Europe is still buying a bunch of stuff. You're still selling stuff to Australia, et cetera, et cetera. But like they're probably selling as much into those markets as they could. Maybe they can push a little more in, but it's not like they had a drought of supply and Australia really wanted more IoT devices.
Sure.
And now they can just move that there. So my point is China's going to have a bunch of extra supply. What Jeff is saying, I just think is kind of fascinating, is you think about selling that supply internally where they currently don't sell a lot of that product. That could be super interesting, right? Where they,
hey, Chinese person, you need some IoT devices in your home.
Yeah.
And you've got 1.3 billion people. Replacing the 300 million that we have is a fraction of what your population is.
I love when that person who's getting that ad is like, motherfucker, I spent all day making those things. And he's like, now you want me to buy them? Like, I just take one from work when I come home.
All right, we have to get out of here, but quickly before we do, have you seen or read anything good this last week? I know this is like too depressing of a place to end.
Okay, yeah, it's depressing. And the ramifications of the supply chain are depressing. We had a little bit of gold in there. I think the if you think about the output from the Smoot-Hawley Act, where we actually have a real chance of this being better.
The pendulum swing. Once half the population starves and dies, the population swing is going to be great.
Absolutely. Think about how cheap land's going to be when half the population dies. That's how we make this positive, Jeffrey. Jesus.
You are rosy.
So I've done a bunch of reading on supply chains. I actually found it really fascinating, sort of this weird emergent behavior that comes out of them and just how complex they are. I can't believe this shit works at all. Like, it's really nuts and any of it works. I'll put a bunch of the links in the show notes. But the thing that was the best that I saw was the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver from last week. This is on HBO.
Yeah.
And he covered Trump and the tariffs.
Yeah.
And it's really great. I did not think that he'd be able to work in the Muppets.
Sure.
But he's got the Muppets in there. They have a nice little cameo. It's really great. If you like John Oliver or if you want to learn more about sort of these tariffs, it's a great place to start. So I'll put that link in the show notes.
Excellent.
For folks. It's really great. How about you? What have you seen?
I'm going to recommend an episode of the Decoder podcast, Nilay Patel interviewing Flexport CEO Ryan Peterson. The episode is called How Trump's Tariffs Actually Work on the Ground. And it is fascinating. It sounds like this is going to be kind of nerdy and wonky. There's a little bit of nerdiness, a little bit of wonkiness to it, but it's great. Ryan Peterson is so knowledgeable about how the supply web works because of his position running Flexport, which is a company that helps other companies ship their goods and get their goods moved from place to place.
They're really trying to automate the administration of freight forwarding. And since there's so much more of that than there's ever been, and it only looks to be increasing, that's where they're looking to make their mark. And I think it's pretty fascinating.
I will put the link in the show notes.
That's awesome. I'll check that out.
That is the episode.
Thank you for joining us for all this nonsense. It's really terrible podcast from The Awful Company. Visit us on the web at nonsense.productions. I'm Stu Little.
I'm Jeff Parker.
If you like this program, please follow, download, subscribe, and like at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, AntennaPod, iHeartRadio, Spotify, My Favorite Overcast, or wherever you may get your podcasts from.
Nonsense is brought to you by Russet Burbank Potatoes. Created by Santa Rosa's own Luther Burbank, this is the classic Idaho potato, known for its starchy, fluffy texture, ideal for baking and frying. Available at fine grocery stores everywhere, Russet Burbank Potatoes. There's no need to reinvent perfection.
Great, now I'm hungry. Thanks. We'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday mornings for more nonsense. Please join us. What if we route everything through the Principality of Sealand? I bet you there's no tariff on that.
I think there's tariffs on everybody. They're tariffing these penguins.
Well, yeah, those penguins had it coming, though, dressed in their fucking tuxedos, waddling around with all their attitude.